Walter, all the amazing work you've done here in caves and other sites across the world, what was it in 1952 that brought you here and you decided this would be your main mission?
Well, I had just gotten married to Nesta, my nice wife, and 3 days after our marriage, we flew to London on a prop plane, which was the only kind, I guess, then. And then we spent a week in London, and then we went to Liverpool and got a boat to India. I think it took 21 days, anchor line, a one-class boat, which was very nice. You didn't have rich people looking down. We were students. I had gotten a Fulbright grant to study the great temples of Orissa, Lingaraj temple, the temple at Puri, the great black pagoda, they call it, at Kanarak. I had been studying at Harvard, and my professor had sort of helped me pick a likely topic. So we went off after an orientation period with the Fulbright people. We went off to Calcutta to stay with a wonderful Indian family, Mukherjees, and that was a really great experience. We stayed on Chaurangi Street or Avenue in the center of Calcutta, in an apartment above what was then the Pan Am Airlines building. And after staying there a little while, being introduced to goat at dinner, which we thought was mutton, but it was goat, we discovered a few months later, to our shock. By then we really liked it. So we went off to Bhubaneswara, where these great temples are, and I went to the most famous of them all, the Lingaraj temple, a huge towering temple dedicated to Lord Shiva, and we were stopped at the gate and said, sorry, you can't get in. So, because only Hindus are allowed. So we went back. I put on a dhoti, Indian costume, of course, and thinking I could pretend that I was a Hindu convert or something. And my wife may have been wearing a sari, I can't remember now, but that didn't work. They turned us away again, which may have been a good thing, because they said if we'd gone in the temple, we could have polluted the temple, and could have caused a riot. I don't know if that's really true, but in any case, I was discouraged. I also couldn't go in the great temple of the Lord Jagannath at Puri for the same reason. So then I thought, if I can't go in the two major temples, I won't do this topic, which was a happy to me circumstance, because I found a much more interesting topic.
So you had some leeway. I mean, your grant.
Keep going, you guys.
In general,
lean back over where you were, just where you were.
There was leeway in the sense. I mean, I think generally when people get grants, they get grants because they're trusted by the people that give the grants, and one can adjust. And even when you've changed the topic, or whether you've changed the topic or not, when the grant is finalized, you're supposed to send in your report. I don't think anyone reads it that seriously. What can they do if you didn't do the work right? I think most grants in this world are given on the basis that the people seem to deserve the grant, and I may have seemed to, but anyway, that was that story. And then we went to, while we were in Bhubaneswar, we went to a group of caves that no one in those days knew anything about. They had been looked at, and they had been dated where they belong in the history by a few scholars. But I felt that was all mixed up. So I thought, this is an interesting thing. If I can't do temples, which really my Sanskrit was not good at all, and temples would have been very difficult to do without Sanskrit. I tried to learn Sanskrit, but I had a serious eye problem, and after about 20 minutes of reading Sanskrit, those texts, all those letters, I would feel sick to my stomach. I mean, it's really why I didn't go into something I love very much, which is English literature, because the professor would say, you know, read Ulysses this weekend. We'll talk about it on Monday. I could not do it. So that was a happy thing, because art history, you look at things in a different way. You're not going line by line, and if you have wandering eye, which is what I had, it doesn't really matter looking at pictures of things. And so that was really, in many ways, a good fault. What do you call it, a felix culpa.
So is that what,
Just relax.
is that what then, that first cave that you went in, that's where you started getting the itch to do more into the caves? You found that interesting
Yeah, we went to the caves. Actually, going was, again, serendipitous, I suppose. We'd really wanted to go to Darjeeling, a hill station, very, very beautiful hill station. But since we had two very good Indian friends who were having a very serious affair, not with their own wives and husbands, but with each other, they couldn't go to Darjeeling because all the Bengalis were going to Darjeeling, and they would have been spotted. So we went to this, another thing they called a hill station, which was more like a mound, and that was the most important monument in that place, which was Ranji, is it right? I'm not sure. Was a insane asylum. So, but the caves were near that place, so that's where we found the caves. And then I started working on those caves. First of all, we spent about a month at a Jain, the caves were Jain caves. So the Jain monks were terribly nice to us. They let us have a table from their kitchen to sleep on. There was no other thing to sleep on, as I recall. And they let us borrow a few pots and pans that we needed. Someone was kind of cooking for us, but we had to promise not to cook any meat or anything like that. So anyway, but we had a great time. We took many photographs. Then we published, or I was working, when I came back to Harvard to do my dissertation, I was working with Joseph Campbell, you know, who wrote the wonderful series of books, an amazing man. And he needed an assistant, and so somehow I got recommended as an assistant, and I went through one of his most important books in a way, which was a redoing, a kind of editing of the work of the great Heinrich Zimmer, called The Arts of Indian Asia. One volume is completely photographs of all the monuments in India. One of the first books where the great monuments of India were really shown in wonderful photographs to the public. And those photographs were by Elliot Elisaphan, who worked for Time magazine and Life magazine. but he hadn't been to these caves, and these caves were so little known that Joseph Campbell wanted to feature them. So he took about 30 pictures, I think, of that. A few other things too, but particularly the Kandagiri, Udayagiri caves. Joseph decided to include those. Paid us, believe it or not, $30 a piece. I mean, we were suddenly rich. $900 we got, which in those days for students was pretty fantastic. Anyway, so meanwhile I was working on my dissertation, but my dissertation had developed into a study not only of Kandagiri, Udayagiri, but of caves in general, early caves. Now I'm working on later caves, by which I mean 5th century, not very much later. But then I was working on the early caves, Kala, Bedsa, Bhaja, Pitalkora, Ajanta itself has early caves, and I was totally taken up with those. I didn't even look very hard at 5th century things, which now I look very hard at. And there are 900 caves, they say, in Maharashtra. So I migrated to Maharashtra, and we visited all of the caves. We came here to Ajanta, or to Fadapur, near Ajanta, to work on the early caves here.
And what year was that?
That was in the same year. Yeah, it was in 1952. Later in.
Still with Nesta?
Yeah, that was. I've been with Nesta for now 52 to 2010. You can figure it. Quite a long time.
I guess what I meant was she was traveling with you still.
Yeah.
And going around with that.
Yeah, and she was doing a lot of photography. She was a very good photographer and very persistent and very careful, like setting everything up very carefully. So the photographs in that Zimmer book are quite excellent. Those were mostly due to her. So we stayed here in Fadapur at the old circuit house, which was made by the Nizam of Hyderabad, the richest man in the world, and he spent a lot of, a tiny bit of his money on a wonderful circuit house, which is about a mile from where we're sitting now. In those days, you were served tea on heavy English silver. Who knows where it's gone now? It's gone. And the waiters had, what I suppose were tight wool jackets and things with a turban, and looked very elegant. And the whole thing had the sort of, I am here now, but earlier the Duke of Wales was probably here. And those places still exist, but the circuit house we stayed in, it's very sad now. The roof has fallen in, and in fact, you could say the whole thing has fallen in. The rose garden is gone. All those things are sadly gone. But the environment is still wonderful, and the caves are still there. So then I got all these notes about all these caves. I went back to Cambridge and sat, putting carbon paper in my typewriter, and so that I could have a copy of my dissertation too. It was a very different world from what it is today. And I typed, from the first draft, I typed the dissertation up while I listened to the horrible Joseph McCarthy, the great trial, and that was just in the background of the dissertation. But I got the dissertation done. Everyone thought it was a pretty fine dissertation. I realize now it wasn't quite as fine as people thought, but it did help me get jobs, but there were no job problems, really. To get a job where you absolutely wanted to go might be difficult, but to get a job at a good place in those days, my poor students now, you know, if they don't have a book done, they don't get a permanent job, and have to fill out all these forms. And we were just in a different world. I mean, there weren't so many of us. For one thing, I was the first studying under the wonderful Benjamin Rowland at Harvard. I was the first person in America to write a PhD in Indian art history.